thank you so much for having us here. And I've learned so much from this hub. So it's great to be able to share a bit of what Eagles is doing. I'll just talk very briefly, maybe for 5 minutes, as like the warm-up act before the headliner, if he can make his internet work, comes on by doing just a brief intro and overview, and then I'll pass it on to Cuthbert, who is the Church and Community Mobilisation Coordinator for Eagles, and he's been working in this area for 17 years. He was actually part of the original team that created the Emoja manual with Tear Fund, and trains in church and community mobilisation nationally and internationally. So he is the actual expert and will be hopefully talking to us very soon. But the other intro thing to say is that the meal approach that we're going to be talking about is a pilot that we're currently using in 2 projects, one in central Malawi and one in northern Malawi. One is under World Renew, who I think are on the call, and we're very grateful for their input into the methodology and their willingness to sort of let us try it out and experiment. We can't yet say it works because, like I said, it's a pilot, we're in the very early stages, and the coronavirus has held everything up by quite a long way. But we thought it would be interesting to share anyway, because it is our attempt to embody our vision, mission and values in our approach to meal, not have it as sort of an add-on at the end. So yeah, I hope you'll find it interesting. I'll explain what the plan was, and then Cuthbert can tell you a bit more about what it's actually looking like in practice when he comes on. Can you have the next slide, please, Stacey? Great. So just a short introduction to what we're talking about, which is Church and Community Mobilisation Process, or CCMP. CCMP equips local churches to work with their communities to creatively problem solve using either their own or locally available resources. It's a process of envisioning churches through biblical reflection and then engaging the community with asset-based activities to identify and analyse opportunities and challenges, which leads to churches and communities taking action together to solve their priorities. And in this way, it breaks mindsets of dependency and brings holistic change, especially for the most vulnerable. Next slide, please. So Eagles has many different donors, and each have their own meal systems, which can be a challenge, including Tear Fund Track, Christian Aid is called Kobo, there are various other ones. But for all of these different methods, we found it was very difficult to effectively monitor CCMP, especially in line with its unique principles and approach. A lot of these other systems were time-consuming for staff to become familiar with. A lot of them use tablets or like complex databases, which communities really struggle to understand because it's not used to technology in that way. Or, however carefully Eagles feeds back, it's still removed from the way that the community would normally work and measure change for themselves. The meal manager at Eagles said it was designed, most meal systems are designed for the Eagles staff to donor interface and actually just shuts the community out. So Eagles leadership decided that they needed something new, and so last year they did a 3-day workshop with an external consultant to try to develop, something that was better aligned with the CCM approach. So on the next slide, you'll see we went for, here's our classic alliterative question. So our key question was, who is our meal actually for and who is it owned by? Obviously, we must be accountable to our donors and we must use the learning to increase our effectiveness. But when finding the balance between the needs of donors, local NGOs or implementing partners, which is us, and then the fact that this is actually the lives of people in faith groups and communities, we thought, are we actually seeking synergy? Are we crafting compromise? Or are we just foregrounding the funders? And in some of our meal, we actually recognise, no, we're just prioritising what the funders want to know. In other parts of our meal, we were kind of forcing slightly awkward compromises between things that were useful to the community, but mainly what the funder needs to know. And we found that we actually had nothing that began from the community's ways of thinking and working and built up from there. Next slide, please. So as Eagles, we decided that if we truly believe that community and local faith actors have the power and responsibility to change their own lives, then all our meals should be primarily for them, while still allowing us to remain accountable to our donors and increase our own effectiveness. So on the screen, there's like a screenshot from our log frame. And if you look in from one of these pilots, and if you look down the log frame, you'll see in the column where it asks who is this used by, they all say first by the church and community. And if we couldn't genuinely answer that in that column, then we thought of a different way to demonstrate that indicator where we actually could. Next slide, please. Another example of this is what we call the pastor checklist. So there are some questions, as I'm sure everyone knows, in any meal system where you just need brief answers for sort of output indicators. But we still thought that the kind of survey that's usually used to find out this information would undermine the mindset change with the pastors and community around breaking dependency, building ownership and responsibility. So we looked for where's the synergy. In each training that we do with pastors, we already knew it's really effective to have time where the pastors discuss their challenges together and help one another find solutions, because we'll train the pastors and then they'll go off and facilitate in their community, then they'll come back together for the next training. So instead of a kind of a donor-facing survey, we developed a checklist for pastors for them to reflect on for half an hour before this session where they discuss it with each other, just to reflect, to structure their thinking, and actually make the session more effective for them. So the questions were mainly open-ended to prompt thinking, like you can see on the screen. These aren't all of them, they're just some of them. But then by Eagles taking photos of their checklist at the end, obviously with their permission, it gave us enough information for the output indicators as well. Next slide. Thanks. So for our intermediate outcomes, these are all largely around changes in behaviour or relationships, such as how the church members and leadership are engaging in integral mission. Are the government and others playing their part? Are the church and community taking action together? So for this, we developed a tool called Picture Participation. And this is basically a scale, which, you know, we see variations of it in all sorts of things. This is chimanga maize, which is the staple crop in Malawi. And it enables local church and community leaders and mobilizers to analyze the extent to which the capacity, structures and systems are in place that will not only lead to long-term change, but actually be able to sustain those changes long after Eagles has gone. So representative groups of community members use pictures of the different stages of growth of chimanga to develop a scale and measure how much different stakeholders are playing their part in the CCMP process. And then finally, on the next slide, we adapted the significant stories of change approach to find out our long-term outcomes, to monitor our long-term outcomes, and by collating a portfolio of stories of change. So we took the 6 areas of faith from our theory of change, including increased and active faith, standards of living, health, education, inclusion, and increased care for the environment. And then I'm sure you've all come across this approach before, but we gathered systematic information to show the impact across the country. So if we had clear criteria for selecting which communities and for why the stories were selected, so they can be used meaningfully for accountability and learning. So that's the idea for across the whole country, which is what we're hoping for it to eventually be used for in the stories, in the 2 pilots that we're currently using it in. They're just doing it as a community. The stories of significant change, there's no need for the selecting communities across the country. But primarily what's lovely about the significant stories of change is it's first and foremost for the communities to celebrate their own success and to inform their decision making in the future. And then the final slide, This is one of my favourite quotes from our director, Victor. But at the end of the day, we looked at our theory of change and asked ourselves, what do we actually need to know to prove that we're having impact? And we were lucky enough that two of our donors, there are slight variations in the World Renew and the Malawi support ones, but this was the overall idea. And we were really lucky that World Renew and Malawi support were both willing to let us have a go. I don't know whether Cuthbert is on the call. Cuthbert, are you there? Otherwise, I can try calling him on WhatsApp so he can tell you more about this in detail. Okay, no, I don't think he is. Let me try this. Sorry. Okay, I'm really sorry. I can't get hold of Cuthbert. Oh, you're there. Hi, Cuthbert. Hi. Sorry, we're on the call now. Do you want to talk, and then we'll see? Can you hear Cuthbert? Can somebody feedback?
Yes.
I know you can hear me, Cuthbert. I'm asking if they can hear you.
Yeah, Steffie, we can hear Cuthbert.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. Cuthbert, everyone can hear you, but you can't hear them. But you can say what you were going to say.
Can you just fill me up on what everybody else has said, whether they want to go back to what everybody else has said?
I've just introduced the meal approach that we came up with in the workshop last year, and said that it was being piloted in Rimpi and in the Catalyze one. And then I said that you were going to tell some stories about what participatory meal looks like with churches and the different tools that you've invented along the way.
All right. Yeah. Hello, everyone. Sorry to come in late. But I think when you're talking about monitoring and evaluation and learning, what I think is, first of all, we have to think about whatever information we get from monitoring and evaluation, who really needs that information? Who is it designed for? And is it just us because we want to collect information and use it for our reports, or is it the community who are the owners of the development and who are the ones going towards their vision? So what is important is, first of all, they have to know where they are going, and then monitoring is to help them to keep track of, or to keep to make sure that they are on track all the time. So they closely look at their progress to make sure that they are not getting stuck or going astray on their path to their vision. So the monitoring and the evaluation process, or the type of monitoring, evaluation, and learning system that you're supposed to use is one that they can easily identify with, but also so that they can easily connect to where they are or whatever they're doing, and then how is it contributing to our vision, but also the developments on the way, how are they contributing, or how can they jeopardize their movement towards their vision. So for them to easily identify with those, we've seen that it's better if we use things that they can easily identify with. We can talk about a journey and then landmarks on the way. We can talk about a maze from seed to seedling to a growing plant to tasseling stage. They know those stages, and then we can compare the progress of their work towards their vision with these plants that they already know and they can always understand. Also breaking up the work into bits and pieces so that a little more people will take up those bits than to pile up all the weight of monitoring on a few people, because then it becomes cumbersome and they get confused. So everyone takes part in the monitoring, and everybody is taking their bit so that it's simplified, it's easy to understand, it's also easy for them to use that information afterwards. So having asked the question, who needs the information, we must also help them to understand why that information is important for them to achieve their goals, because that information helps them to celebrate achievements, because now they will see that we have achieved something, they celebrate it, and it's an encouragement, and it's the energy to help them to keep going. But also, when they fade and start maybe getting to something else, they should be able to, the system should be able to help them to get back to course and keep moving forward, so they're not stuck. So the capacity building is very important, but also the strength of the tool is in its simplicity, where the people can also use it, but it should also bring the same results. So using things that can easily identify with, like maize plants, that will help to measure the change that is happening. That will also help to measure the distance they've covered on their plans and so on. Let me start like that before I also go astray.
I don't know, Dan, whether you want to, people have any questions for Cuthbert? I can pass them on to him.
Yeah, now would be a great time if there are questions for Cuthbert or for Steffie about what has been shared. I have one question for both Steffie and Cuthbert. I'm curious, in that certainty that the data that is being gathered, it needs to be valuable to the community. Have there been times where that has been challenged within the organization, or have there been examples of evaluations or learning objectives that the organization has had that have put that commitment to the test?
Cuthbert, Dan's asking whether there have been times in Eagles where the commitment to putting the communities and what they need to know first, where that's been put to the test through particular meal approaches or evaluations, or I think even from maybe other members of Eagles, or has it always been is everyone on board with the prioritizing what the communities need to know?
It's kind of even Eagles, it's a new concept that we are working on. It's the learning from a number of years of work, and then reviews and seeing if our approaches are working. We've used it in a number of projects before.
But now what we're doing now is learning from what has happened in different projects, so that we can perfect it and make sure that our mayor is also working out well.
Yeah, thank you for that response. And Cuthbert, it's great to have you on the Zoom, so welcome. Yeah, so the next question is from Lydia. Lydia, please bring your question.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Hello.
Great. Thank you for the presentation. This is Lydia from Tier Fund. Just really resonating with the challenges you shared around fitting monitoring and evaluation into CCMP, which is very much about the process and not a project. And just really loved what you shared around the use of images and having it as something for the communities to celebrate first and foremost. So I have a lot of questions, great maybe to follow up, but one thing I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more around the kind of rhythm that you go through with some of these tools and how it fits into the CCM process. Is this something that you would do at like the end of each stage of the process, and kind of how do you fit that in to maybe the donors' requirements? So yeah, I guess two parts to the question. What does this look like in terms of the rhythm of the process, and how have donors sort of responded, and have they been supportive of these approaches you're using?
Theoretically, and Cuthbert can answer whether this has been, when we were planning with World News, for example, to use these tools to monitor the project in the north of Malawi, the ones like the pastor checklist that gets the more output level indicators, like are people participating in Bible studies and things like that, that's sort of every 3 months, ideally. And then the idea was to have a community celebration, which was Cuthbert's idea, once a year, where you would do both the picture participation tool and stories of change. And yes, World Renew were very supportive in helping us to, making sure that they could get the information that they needed for their overall systems of meal, but also that Eagles could try out this this approach that really prioritized what the communities need to know. I don't know, Cuthbert, whether you have something to add.
Yeah, when the communities, as you design together with the community, what they want to do, and also what they want to achieve, how to monitor that, you do it in a way that the community can participate in it, but also the donor, you make sure that as you monitor, because most of the donor requirements or the indicators that we have on our logical framework, we'll also be talking about the same transformation in the community. And then there are things that will come up, like in the community, things like the change that they want, but there will also be some underlying causes that they might need to be taught. For example, you may not have a community that will tell you that gender inequality is a problem in our community, but when you train them using different tools, gender analysis tools, so that they understand the importance of making sure that women are valued, and both women and men are valued. Things like child protection or safeguarding, they have to be trained and have to understand. And then when you put indicators that help you to measure how things are going in those areas, even as they do their indicators in their monitoring, the things they will celebrate, these things will also come in because you have trained them, they understand them, and they know their importance. So they will also be included in all those things. So most of it, we are measuring the same things. What the donor wants to know and what the committee wants to know will end up becoming the same thing. But when we want to monitor them at the committee level, we simplify it so that the committee can participate in the monitoring. For example, when like storytelling at the end, even at periodic times when we want to celebrate the change that has happened, when they tell stories, we also capture those stories and also go into the reports. And then those stories also, the number of people that will have experienced change, those numbers will also go into our reports, and those will also be required by the donor. So the same things that the donor requires, when we take it to the community, we simplify them so that we monitor them in a simpler way than we would if we just wanted to give information to the donor and do it quickly. So we want them to be part of the monitoring and to see the information as useful and as important, while we also use the same information and fulfill the needs of our donors.
Cuthbert and Steffi, thank you so much for sharing. My name is Rebecca. I'm joining from Hope International. 2 questions I would love to hear your reflections on. One, I'm curious to hear how the community has received this invitation to engage, especially if these are local communities that have much experience with NGOs and have typically not been engaged in this way. What has that journey been like? What is the community perception? And then secondly, how has this impacted the way that you report on findings? If you were used to primarily creating reports and presenting findings for donors, like what are some creative ways that you have shared findings with local communities in a way that's accessible and understandable?
Cuthbert, do you want to talk about how the communities have maybe shared some of the stories about the communities that have really taken to meal, or how they've found adapting to monitoring their projects?
Yeah, I think it is empowering to them because they become part, they feel part of it, they feel like they are key in their own development. Because prior to all this, when we do our CCMP in the community, there are tools that we do with them that try to help the community members to realize that they're the most important people in their own transformation. So they come from that understanding. Now, when you come to planning, they also know we are very important in the plans of our community, so that we plan what we want to do. And then when you come to monitoring, the monitoring and the evaluation method that you're going to use, it has to be that one that will accommodate them and also make them participate. So they feel important. I'll give you an example of a community where we had used this, of course, not the way it is now, but we had simplified monitoring in a way that they all participated in it. We set up a monitoring and evaluation and learning network where every committee in the village had an M&E person, and we looked at, discussed with the community how best we could monitor the process. Because once they have a vision, and then you have short-term and long-term goals, and then everyone wants to know if what they're doing is really leading them to that. And then you ask questions like, how do we ensure that what we are doing is really leading us to where we want to get? For example, if they say we want to increase the numbers of, or maybe we want to replant the trees in our community and make sure that we've got all the areas where we had forest and all the trees that have been cut down, we want them all replaced. They can phrase it the way they want, but every time we work, we need to know whether we're really going towards that. So they will see how many trees they have planted, how many have survived, and then they also want to see how many instances of people cutting down trees, wantonly, that are still going on after the campaigns they're doing to stop that. So when you talk about practical things, they are very eager to engage. And the other thing is they love it because they feel like they are considered to be important in their own development. After the background of all these attitude change tools we've done with them, and we make them feel like for this community change, you are the ones who are supposed to be in the forefront.
Yeah, thank you, Cuthbert, for that response. Are there any other questions for Steffi and Cuthbert?
Hello, this is Daniel ONeill, Christian Journal for Global Health. I just wondered, when you're collecting the data, are you taking qualitative data and then turning it into quantitative data in order for, depending on which constituents you seek to reach with the information that you're acquiring? Thank you.
It's both. We collect both quantitative and qualitative, and most of the qualitative data will be on the celebration, and when people tell stories of their own change and transformation and how they feel about what's going on in their community, and then you'll be able to collect stories and the quotes of what people are saying and the feelings of the community in general. But then also the committee that is responsible for, that is leading in that process, will also be collecting the quantitative data. Apart from that, there are also methods where you collect quantitative data in a very simple way. For example, if you know, most of the time donors want to know how many people have been helped in your community, and you don't want to double count, like you count the same person twice or you count the same household twice. A simple way would be like a household that has benefited from the program. For example, maybe they have learned how to make fertilizer, and that is improving their food security. Then in their community meeting, they might be asked to throw an object into a box, and that box will be used for celebrating the numbers of people that are benefiting. So periodically, the community will count the objects in that box, and then they will have numbers of people that have benefited from that. So then they celebrate every increase of numbers, and then people give their testimonies. So you're getting quantitative, at the same time you're getting qualitative. So you also want to make it to be fun. You also want to make it to be very easy, very simple, but still getting the same results. You're still getting the same numbers, and then you're also getting the qualitative data. You're also getting the people's feelings and how they feel they've been helped, and all the quotes have been taken, but also stories have been collected. So you can go now, take pictures of the change, and also households that are celebrating the change in their own families, and so on.
And you can do it the other way around as well, like qualitative can become quantitative. Like Cuthbert was explaining to me the other day his idea for making the stories of significant change quantitative by, you know, say somebody tells a story in one area of change, say, oh, we've benefited, we have, you know, improved hygiene in our household because we've built a, you know, a new toilet in the garden after hearing, you know, the church's teaching or whatever. And then just by asking, okay, so then who else has benefited in a similar way? Who else has, you know, who else has seen the same improvement? You can then get everybody to take a step forwards, depending on how much improvement they've seen, or just, you know, yes and no, you know, however complicated you want to make it. But using that same idea of just having a community gathered together for a community celebration, it opens up all these different ways of, yeah, qualitative becoming quantitative and quantitative becoming qualitative. And yeah, I don't think the line is nearly as hard as it often, yeah, as it can often appear in the literature, maybe.
Yeah, and this method can be used even after just one training. For example, you've done a training on gender-based violence, and then in the next training, in the next meeting, as you review the past training, and you ask them to give testimonies about what the past training has helped to change in their families. And one person stands up and then they say, in my family, we used to fight regularly, but now there are no more fights. Then when you ask them to say, who else has experienced this change in their family, then those who have also experienced it will stand up, and those who are free to give their testimony will also do that, and then the group will celebrate together, and then somebody else stands up, and then they also talk about the change that has happened in their family. For example, since that training, we now plan our resources together, and then who else has experienced that, they also stand up, and then you also take the numbers. But also then you have reports from those people, so you have both qualitative and quantitative. Just also to say, it's important to make sure that all the jargon is taken out when you are working with the people in the community, because it becomes confusing. People don't really know what you're talking about sometimes. So as easier the simpler the language, the better for the people, and then the more. The easier the language, the more people participate, and also the simpler the tool, the more people want to do it together with you. There have been times when I remember we were doing a certain tool, and then people were not really getting what it was all about, and then we tried to simplify it. When they understood, one of them said, let me do it. And then the person facilitated even much better than the facilitator who was facilitating the tool before. So when it's easy, people easily understand, they will be very happy to take part, and then the results will be much better than when you take a long time to explain and people don't understand, and you still want to use the same tool because that's the tool you feel like it has to be used. So it's not about it being easy to use the facilitator, but it's when you assess and you see that it's easy enough for the community to participate, and they should know exactly what you are talking about. I'll give an example. I was doing an evaluation recently with a community, and then I used just ranking things on a scale of 1 to 10, and then saying on your projects in terms of performance. We did 1 by 1. So this project, from a scale of 1 to 10, 10 meaning where you really want it to be, 1 meaning where you don't want it to be. So how would you rank? So they ranked their projects. So they just took parts because it was easy to put numbers, but they didn't really understand what it was all about. It was fun, but at the end, when I told them, when we read it and said this is what it means, they said no, that's not what it really means. I mean, what is really happening here? I said, but this is what you've done. They said no, actually we just put numbers there because it was fun and it was very easy. We didn't really understand what you wanted us to do. I said fine. So, but do you understand this too? I explained it and they didn't. So I said, okay, we'll use another tool. We use a simpler tool. And then in the end, when they saw the results, they said, yeah, that's really what's going on here. So even the ones we're talking about, you find that it's different from community to community. That's why a facilitator has to have a number of tools, alternative tools that you can use. If they find it too difficult, then you pick up another tool and you use. I remember someone was saying you have to have a number of them up your sleeves. So if one isn't really working, use a simpler tool so that people should really know what you're talking about. Because sometimes they can just enjoy putting numbers there and they don't really know what you're doing. So first of all, make sure that they really understand what you're talking about. They should really understand the tool and then see if it really leads to what they really want to know. Because otherwise, they can just enjoy the tool and then the results will not really be what it is really on the ground.
Thank you, Cuthbert, and thank you, Steffie, for sharing from Eagle's experience. I know you've touched on a subject that our organization has wrestled with, and I'm sure many of the other organizations represented here have wrestled with, of who is the data for, and how does that then inform the method that we use for every step of the process. So yeah, really appreciated the presentation and sharing from your experience. All right, friends, we are at the end of our time, and so thank you for making the space to join the conversation today. And wanted to just highlight before we conclude that attached to the invitation for today's meeting, or at the bottom of that was a reminder to save the date for the upcoming meeting on December 16th at 9 a.m. We'll hear more from Jennifer and the research that she's doing as it relates to the compendium and meal across different faith perspectives. And then we will also hear from Mohammed Abu Nimer from Kaiseed, who's going to be sharing from their experience. So we look forward to being back with you on December 16th. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.